Hello parents and guardians. This video will teach you how to enable restrictions on your student's iPad. Restrictions, once enabled, limit the use of certain applications and features on the iPad. These include but are not limited to Safari, the web browser, the camera, FaceTime, installing and deleting apps, and Siri. Restrictions also allow you to limit content based on its rating and set the privacy settings on certain apps and areas on the iPad. Before we look at how to enable restrictions, let's take a moment to look at this iPad on the screen. This iPad has no restrictions on it currently. I can see things like the camera and the FaceTime app. I can also see Safari, the internet browser. Let's enable the restrictions on this iPad and see how that changes things. To start, find your settings icon. This looks like gray and silver gears. Touch them. On the left, touch General, and in the General menu, look for Restrictions. At the top, when I touch Enable Restrictions, the iPad asks me for a 4-digit passcode. This passcode can change every single time I enable restrictions, and it does not have to be the same passcode that your student uses to unlock his or her iPad. For security reasons, it will ask you to reset or re-enter your restrictions passcode again. Anything in the on position is currently allowed under the current restrictions. Let's turn off Safari and the camera, which will also turn off FaceTime, and see what happens to the iPad. Let's go back to the home screen. Now you can see where the camera used to be, there is absolutely nothing on this iPad. That's because they can't get to the camera. Where the Safari icon was, it's now missing because the restriction is on. Let's look at a few more restriction settings. By touching Settings, and again going to Restrictions. Because I have the restrictions enabled, it's asking me to re-enter the passcode I just set. We can also limit the use of the iTunes and the iBookstore to limit music, movie, book, TV show downloads. You can also limit installing and deleting apps, as well as the use of Siri. On content, I can allow or disallow certain rated content. So for music and iPod or podcasts, I can turn off explicit content. For movies, I can decide that I only want this student to view movies that are age appropriate, so maybe PG-13 and above. For TV shows, I can limit the rating on the TV shows, or I can just not allow TV shows at all. On books, I can limit the explicit content. And apps are rated as well, so I can make sure that my student only has age-appropriate apps. I can turn off in-app purchases and require a password for purchases. I can change the location settings, services settings, to turn them on or off for my student to where they cannot broadcast their location. I can allow whether or not they use Twitter by turning it on or off, and I can allow whether or not they use their photos in certain applications. Maybe I don't want them to access their photos on Twitter. I can set a volume limit to where once the volume is set, they can't turn it up or down. I can also limit their Game Center use to where they cannot play multiplayer games or add friends. Once I have my restriction settings enabled, I can go back to the home screen and hand the iPad to the student. Before your student brings their iPad back to school, however, we do ask that you disable the restrictions. To do this, go back to the General and Restrictions and enter your passcode. Either disable restrictions, which asks you to enter your passcode again, or at least allow your student to use Safari and install and delete apps. Students are asked to install apps that are free usually during class very often. It's important that they're able to get to the internet browser during class as well. If you have questions, you can email starkr@lisd.net, STARKR@lisd.net.